The story I'm about to tell you is 100% true, and it's become so well known that it surpassed the Jersey Devil as New Jersey's top mystery. One night in June 2014, Derek Broaddus went outside to check the mail, and inside the mailbox was a white card-shaped envelope with thick handwriting and no return address, and the letter was addressed to the new owner. Little did he know, just 3 days after closing on their new dream home, his family's nightmare was just beginning. The letter read, "Dearest new neighbor at 657 Boulevard, allow me to welcome you to the neighborhood. Do you know the history of the house? Do you know what lies within the walls of 657 Boulevard? Why are you here? I will find out. Did 657 Boulevard call to you with its force within? The house has been the subject of my family for decades now, and as it approaches its 110th birthday, I have been put in charge of watching and waiting for its second coming. My grandfather watched the house in the 1920s, and my father watched it in the 1960s. It's now my time. And do you know the history of the house? I see that you have already flooded it with contractors so that you can destroy the house as it was supposed to be. Bad move. You don't want to make 657 Boulevard unhappy. You have children. I've seen them. So far, I think there are 3 that I have counted. Was your old house too small for the growing family?" And then the letter ends with, "Welcome, my friends. Let the party begin. Signed, The Watcher." After reading the letter, Derek, who was home alone, ran around the house, turning off all of the lights so that no one could see inside, and then he called police. When police arrived and they read the letter, they said, "What the F is this?" The police understandably asked Derek if he had any enemies and recommended moving a piece of construction equipment that was on the back porch in case the watcher wanted to toss it through the window and get inside of the house. The police also said it would be best if they didn't say anything to their neighbors because now they were all suspects. That night, the Broadduses emailed the Woods family who sold them the house, and Andrea Woods said that she did remember getting a letter from the watcher, but she and her husband thought the letter was more strange than threatening. They just tossed it out and they didn't give it another thought, and they got the impression that the watcher was thanking them for taking care of the house. They said they never had any issues and they never felt watched. They rarely even locked their doors. They had lived in the house for 23 years, and that was the only letter that they had ever received from the watcher. The Broadduses also asked if they had any idea who the watcher might be, or why he or she had written in the letter, and it looks like they listened. While Derek was giving a tour of the renovation to a couple on the block, he froze when the wife said, "It'll be nice to have some young blood in the neighborhood." Something to note here. The letter that was received was postmarked June the 4th, and this was before the sale was even public, and it was a day after contractors had arrived. 2 weeks after the chilling letter arrived, Maria stopped by the house to look at some paint samples and to check the mail, because they were currently staying at their old house. As she looked through the mail, which was mostly the type that you get after you purchase a home, she recognized the familiar thick black lettering on a card-shaped envelope, and immediately her stomach sank and she called the police. The second letter said, "Welcome again to your home at 657 Boulevard. The workers have been busy and I've been watching you unload carfuls of your personal belongings. Have they found what's in the walls yet? In time they will. The house is anxious for you to move in. It's been years and years since the young blood ruled the hallways of the house. Have you found all of the secrets it holds yet? Will the young blood play in the basement, or are they too afraid to go down there alone? I would be very afraid if I were them. It's far away from the rest of the house, and if you were upstairs, you would never hear them scream. Will they sleep in the attic, or will you all sleep on the second floor? Who has the bedrooms facing the street? I'll know as soon as you move in, and it'll help me know who is in which bedroom. Then I can plan better. All of the windows and doors in the house allow me to watch you and track you as you move through the house. Who am I? I'm the Watcher, and I've been in control of the house for the better part of 2 decades now. The Woods family turned it over to you, and it was their time to move on and kindly sold it when I asked them to. I pass by many times a day. 65 Boulevard is my job, my life, my obsession, and now you are too, Broaddus family. The Watcher had addressed them by name, but misspelled it, and they had to have been close enough to hear them talking to the renovators, or they had listening devices somewhere. The letter ended with, "Welcome to the product of your greed." Greed is what brought the past 3 families to 657 Boulevard, and now it's brought you to me. Have a happy moving in day. You know I will be watching. The sentence that references greed doesn't sound like it was written by a former inhabitant of the house, otherwise they would be referring to themselves as greedy. The Watcher was also purposefully tormenting the Broadduses by referring to their children in the letters. It mentioned an easel that one of the children was using on an enclosed porch, and asked if she was the artist in the family. The porch wasn't easily seen because of vegetation, so the person that wrote the letter had to be either behind the house or right next door. But for some reason, no one could determine who was stalking the family. After that letter, they decided to put their renovations on hold, and they no longer took their kids to the house. The thought of moving in caused overwhelming anxiety for the couple. Could their kids ever play outside, or could they ever have friends over? A third, and even more frightening and unhinged letter arrived a couple weeks later, and it said, "The house is crying from all of the pain it's going through. You've changed it and made it so fancy. You're stealing its history. It cries for the past and what used to be in the time when I roamed its halls." The 1960s were a good time for 657 Boulevard, when I ran from room to room, imagining the life with the rich occupants there. And the house was full of life and young blood. Then it got old, and so did my father. But he kept watching until the day he died. And now I watch and wait for the day when the young blood will be mine again. Now, the Broadduses were thinking that the suspect may be someone upset over losing out on the house. So when they asked the Woods family, they said that one interested buyer backed out after a bad medical diagnosis, and the other had just found another house. 657 Boulevard is turning on me. It's coming after me. I don't understand why. What spell did you cast on it? It used to be my friend, and now it's my enemy. I'm in charge of the house. It's not in charge of me. I will fend off its bad things and wait for it to become good again. It will not punish me. I will rise again. I will be patient and wait for this to pass and for you to bring the young blood back to me. The house needs young blood. It needs you. Come back and let the young blood play again like I once did. Let the young blood sleep in the house. Stop changing it and let it alone. By now, Maria was obsessed and terrified, because almost anyone could be the mysterious Watcher. She'd stare into the faces of everyone at the grocery store wondering if they were the Watcher. Can you imagine living like that? She was also having nightmares about a man who lived nearby, and in the dream, the man was wearing boots and he was carrying a pitchfork, and he was calling to her children, but she wasn't able to get to them in time. Maria also went to see a therapist, and when she was asked how she was doing, she just burst into tears. The therapist said she was suffering from post-traumatic stress and that it wouldn't go away until they got rid of the house. Now was the time to sell the house that they never even got to live in. At this point, the Broaddus family was fed up with getting creepy notes about their young blood from some strange, mysterious figure. So they reached out to a few experts in the field, and one of the experts was Candace DeLong, and she's the former FBI agent who inspired the character Clarice Starling in Silence of the Lambs. They also hired a security firm to look for handwriting matches, but unfortunately the Broadduses still didn't have any answers. At one point in the investigation, police suspected the Broadduses' next-door neighbor Michael Langford, who had been diagnosed with schizophrenia. Sometimes he would scare the new neighbors by walking through their backyards or peeking into the windows of homes that were being renovated. People that knew him said that those things were just unusual neighborly kindnesses. One neighbor said that he'd go out and get the newspapers for him every morning. The Langford family had lived there since the 60s, and according to the letters, that was when the Watchers family began watching the house. Michael's father had died 12 years earlier, and the current watcher claimed to have been on the job for 2 decades. After learning this, Derek thought the case was solved. It all made sense to him. The Langford house was right next to the easel on the porch. But when questioned, Michael said he didn't have anything to do with the letters, and his family backed him up. They said that there was no way he could even write notes like that. So some DNA found on one of the envelopes belonged to a woman, and the sample didn't match anyone in the Langford home. So Derek was back at square one. He had a security system installed with webcams, and he'd spend nights in the dark just watching and waiting to see if anyone was lurking around the house. They considered getting guard dogs, and they even placed an advertisement for a military veteran to guard the property. They also looked into former housekeepers and their descendants to see if someone was jealous that the Broadduses had bought a home that they couldn't afford. By the end of 2014, the investigation was at a standstill. The Watcher had left no digital trail and no fingerprints. So out of desperation, Derek showed the letters to his priest, who agreed to bless the house. And by this time, Derek and Maria were living with her parents, and they fought constantly. They were paranoid, depressed, and they had to take medication to fall asleep. 6 months after the first letter arrived, they put the house up for sale, and they initially listed it for more than they paid because of the renovations that they'd done. But once they showed the creepy letters to potential buyers, the offers fell through. So the Broadduses filed a legal complaint against the Woods family, arguing that the Woods should have disclosed the letter just as they had the fact that water sometimes got in the basement. In 2015, the Broadduses filed a lawsuit against the Woods for not disclosing that they had received a letter before the sale. 2 years later, a judge threw the suit out, saying it could set an unreasonable precedent for what sellers would have to disclose, and because the Woods family didn't try to cover up that they'd received the letter. Unfortunately, a local reporter learned about the complaint, and the story went viral. And one local reporter set up a lawn chair to watch the house himself. They ended up with over 300 media requests, but they decided not to speak publicly to spare their children any more attention. And this is when they left Westfield and went to a friend's house. After the story went viral, web sleuths became interested in the case. One commenter on NJ.com suggested ground-penetrating radar to find whatever the Watcher claimed was in the walls. The home inspector had actually done that, and the only issue that was found was the house had a lack of insulation. A year later, police recognized that they had missed a very significant clue. Around the same time that the Broadduses had received their first letter, another family in the neighborhood had also received one. The family had lived in their house for years, and their children were now grown, so they just threw the letter away, just as the Woods family did. And after that information was released, one of the adult children posted about it on Facebook, but then they deleted the post. When investigators spoke to the family, they said the letter was similar to the Broadduses. Now things had gotten even more confusing. Because no one who had lived in the house before the Woods family could recall anything unusual happening in the house, people started to wonder if the Broadduses had sent the letters to themselves. Was it all just a big hoax? Maria's DNA was tested, and it didn't match the DNA that was recovered from the letters. Some believed that the Broadduses had suffered buyer's remorse, or they realized that they couldn't actually afford the house, so they came up with a scheme to get out of the sale. Maybe Derek was planning on committing insurance fraud. Maybe they were after a movie deal like the Lutzes in the Amityville Horror. Actually, the Broadduses did receive several offers, but they turned them down. And Lifetime released a movie called The Watcher, despite a cease and desist letter from the Broadduses. Something else that's interesting to note is that Maria was born a few years after Westfield resident John List murdered his wife, his mother, and his 3 children in their home. She also remembers a time when she and other kids in the neighborhood were told to look out for a strange van driving around town. Her mother didn't want her to have a false sense of security and think that they lived in Mayberry. She'd say it wasn't that bad things were going on all the time, it was that bad things happened everywhere. During an open house, each time a potential buyer showed interest and met with the Broadduses' lawyer to read the letters, they would back out. A tough guy from Staten Island said, "F it, I'm going to get a house at a discount." But after he read those letters, they never heard from him again. They eventually came up with the idea of selling the house to a developer who could then tear it down and split the property into 2 homes, but the planning board didn't approve it. But shortly after the planning board's decision, they got a little bit of good news. A family with 2 large dogs agreed to rent the house. The renter said that he wasn't worried about the watcher, but he did have a clause in the lease that let him out just in case of another letter. 2 weeks later, the 4th letter arrived. It said, "To the vile and spiteful Derek and his wench of a wife Maria." You wonder who the watcher is. Turn around, idiots. Maybe you've spoken to me, one of the so-called neighbors who has no idea who the watcher could be. Or maybe you do know, and you're too scared to tell anyone. Good move. 657 Boulevard survived your attempted assault and stood strong with its army of supporters barricading its gates. My soldiers of the boulevard followed my orders to a T. They carried out their mission and saved the soul of 657 Boulevard with my orders. All hail the watcher. The family was spooked, but they agreed to stay if cameras were installed around the house, and the letter also hinted at seeking revenge. Maybe a car accident, maybe a fire, maybe something as simple as a mild illness that never seems to go away, but makes you feel sick day after day after day after day. Maybe the mysterious death of a pet. Loved ones suddenly die. Planes and cars and bicycles crash. Bones break. This is still an open case, but the Broadduses know that it's unlikely that the watcher will ever be caught. Some believe a supernatural entity is responsible for the letters, while others think that they were sent by the house itself. But the most rational explanation is that the letters were sent by a person who's still out there, waiting. One Christmas Eve, several families received anonymous letters in their mailboxes. They were delivered by hand to the homes of people who had been the most vocal in criticizing the Broadduses online. One of them, who lived a few blocks down the road, had written on Facebook, "I wish we could go back to the days of tar and feathers. I have just a couple in mind." Another family who got the letter said that it was weirdly poetic, as the watchers had been, and it accused the families of speculating inaccurately about the family. The thing that was different about these letters is that they were written by Derek Broaddus. He wasn't proud of writing them, and he hadn't even told his wife about it, but he says that those were the only anonymous letters he'd written. The Broadduses will live with this experience for the rest of their lives, but for the rest of Westfield, the story has become little more than a creepy urban legend, and it's the house to walk by on Halloween, if you're brave enough, that is.